Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today's guest is Will, and he works as the head of copy for How&How, an amazing design and branding agency out in London and LA. And Will is responsible for anything involving words and collaborating on all things creative for How&How. So he has 12 years of experience across branding, marketing, design agencies, helping people talk to other people in a way they both like. So I think today we're going to be talking about how writing plays such an important part in branding, but not only that, in marketing yourself, perhaps as a designer. So anybody that's already, watching and listening so far, don't think that this conversation isn't for you. I think we want to try to unpack how writing, specifically speaking about yourself, whether you're a design studio, an agency, a freelancer, commission artist, something like that. I think it's going to be super helpful to have this strategy. So Will, if you don't mind, maybe just start with a little bit of what you do on the day-to-day. I know you recently joined How&How, so I'm sure you're getting up to gear with how everything works there, but maybe just a little bit more about your background and what you do, and then we can just dive into this conversation on writing.
Yeah, thank you. Day to day varies massively, but as we were saying, kind of anything to do with words and creativity, but that could be naming brands, it could be coming up with a campaign idea, it could be creating a tone of voice for a brand from scratch or refreshing one. So really, especially at How&How, taking kind of interesting, disruptive companies and helping them find a way to speak, helping them find their voice and getting that out in the world in the most polished way possible, really, and the most on-brand way for them.
Right. And so for you, does that look more like everything from the kind of word mapping aspect of branding to investigating taglines and slogans to then eventually what would be, paragraphs talking about these companies? Is that kind of the progression?
Yeah, it would be the full remit from kind of establishing what the company stands for, their strategy behind it. So it could be helping the strategy team kind of position the company, what stands them apart, writing manifestos, and then get to the creative side of things. So shaping what this voice actually is, understanding how it speaks, what words they use, all that kind of imaginative area, and then executing it. So that could be film scripts, it could be writing books, it could be writing long chunks of anything, really. But yeah, if it's involving words and it's to do with a brand, I'm usually across the kind of full remit of that.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So, but you're also you're in the process rather early then, right? From the start of the branding kind of extravaganza, because it's rare you're going to jump right into the Illustrator or Photoshop or something before you have this written idea, right?
Yeah, I'm as early as possible, and I think that's kind of the key for writers, is to get in there as early as possible to really just start defining things. So making sure that they're starting things at the same time as designers, and it can become a really collaborative process. I think both sides of that can benefit from each other massively.
Yeah. So I kind of want to hang out on this idea of why writing, words, themes, topics, moods should be the first thing that anybody thinks about. And I want this to be as helpful, obviously, for the individual, because I know a lot of, individual creatives and or freelancers or super small business owners are going to be watching this just as much as someone who does lead perhaps a small creative team, or maybe they're not a design agency, but they are, a business, perhaps a local business or an online business or a shop or something. So can you walk us through why it's so important, kind of in your own terms, before you jump into starting to design something? Or even, like, I would say from my experience, what I see most of the time is whether you're working on a client or even for yourself, like if you're trying to do this for yourself, it's really hard. You're immediately just going to jump into looking at references, looking at colors, fantasizing, daydreaming, before sitting down and getting like a little booklet and just writing out my core values. So if in your own words, you can maybe encourage and motivate people to attempt to forego some of that
Yeah.
the referencing and stuff like that, and encourage them to sit down and start with words. Does that make sense? I don't know if that's so much as a
No,
question.
it makes
Yeah.
perfect
Okay.
sense. I think whenever I start something new or I work with a new company, I always am interested in what they do, and that's the first thing that I grasp onto. So before I put pen to paper, or if I was a designer, I start kind of pulling reference, I need to know what that company does. And the
Mhm.
clearer you can be on that articulation, the better. So I think it's really beneficial to just, as you were saying, know what you stand for, know what you stand against, know what makes you different, and being able to just put that down in words. And they don't have to be well polished, copywritten words. It can just be
Mm.
thoughts or musings or an idea. But being able to just articulate that and being able to explain what it is you're doing in a concise way is just so helpful. And I always say that copywriting for me is just helping people talk to other people in a way they both like. And it's it is as simple as that sometimes. It's
Okay.
me being able to communicate what I do to you in the clearest way possible. And it's probably doing that through a sentence rather than something visual or something conceptual. It's just really, I think it's one of the most simple things. And I think what's important about writing is that most of us have the ability to do it. Most of us learn how to do it when we're young. We're not all poetic or masters of the craft by any means, but everyone has the ability to pick up a pen and just write down their thoughts and get something on paper. And I would
Right.
really encourage people to do that.
Yeah, I also would encourage them to do that because it helps just get the kind of brain dump out of what it is you're trying to do. I mean, I would say even a column for target audience, even just as words, as like, not necessarily building a whole persona or anything, just like, this market or this whatever. So if someone was going to sit down, whether they be trying to do this for themselves or trying to build a business, they sell products or something, or otherwise, maybe they're a freelancer that is going to be working with a client and they're listening to this because they want to know a better process for helping the client.
Yeah.
What are the steps that help people get the words out? I like how you described it as you kind of just helping them formulate sentences and thoughts to say to other people in a way that they both like, right? And so that already stops the kind of like being fake mandate, which I don't like. Like you don't just say something that someone likes to hear, right?
Exactly.
Which I think is another pitfall. But to get to that point, what is the process that you would walk through? What are the questions that you ask? What are the tasks to be done to like actually get some meaningful words out?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the number one thing I would do is not just sit down with a blank piece of paper, because
Okay.
that's just going to scare you and it's probably going to make your mind freeze.
Mm.
Or at least not sit down with a blank piece of paper and start trying to formulate something without posing a question to yourself, but maybe sitting down and writing down some key questions. So, who is my audience? What am I giving to them? What is that USP? What can only I give them? And just being really colloquial with that. We're not trying to craft a tagline at this point. It can
Okay.
just be thoughts. It could be a quote you've read. It could be anything really. I would just try and start pooling information without too much structure behind it. I think as soon as we start to get into anything that constrains you, you're going to probably freak out and think
Mm.
you're not a good enough writer, or worry about what you're putting down. I would always encourage people to just kind of, my personal thing is to dump everything out.
Yeah.
And that might be me going for a walk and having my notes on my phone rather than just being
Okay.
sat at a desk, or it might be going for a quick run and then coming back and just not noting down my ideas. But
Mm.
yeah, I don't think there's a solid process, but I would
Okay.
encourage people to be loose with it, to kind of find what works for them. And yeah, I think the blank page is always going to be a barrier, and it's
Mm.
going to scare people. So it could be anything. It might even just reading a blog about something that's interesting or anything just starts your creative juices flowing.
Mm.
But yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, that reminds me. I think the speech to text function in the Memos app is so
Yeah,
good. I wrote probably half of my book that way. Obviously, it wasn't perfect. I was just on a walk. Like literally, as you said that, it reminded me. Like I would just take super long walks, an hour, 2 hours, and I would just talk through what I'm trying to think for the section. Get home, copy it all over into a document, and then I've like already got my workspace, right? And so it's like you said, I never was able to get enough out if I just sat down with a Google Doc in front of me. Like for me, I had to be moving. I don't know, something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah,
So that
yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
I think that moving or having a conversation with someone, so just sitting
Mm,
down and talking to someone and recording it, I think the number one skill of any copywriter, I always say, is knowing how to edit. That's what's the best thing, is to be able to edit, because that reduces a lot of things down. So if you can get a lot of things out and finding a way to do that, so whether it is going for a walk with your voice memos or having a conversation with your partner or talking to your friends about it and just recording those instances, you can listen back to them. It will make
mm.
you riff off those central ideas. It's just a lot of an easier way of getting information out of yourself, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So once you have words out, whether they be, thoughts, sentences, quotes, feelings, maybe, aesthetics, audience, when you get to that point, how do you move? What happens in the next stage? Because this stuff has to be, I assume, synthesized, and it's going to eventually turn into something. So whether you're working with a client or maybe even something someone can do at home,
Yeah.
what's the filter then? Like, what do we do with the words?
So I think that's where structure does come into play.
Okay.
So you probably need to, depending if you're filling out a strategy for your business or you're even just setting yourself some questions, I would almost bullet point things out and say, this is what I want to say, and then look at this bank of language that you have and try and
Mm,
populate that. So rather than, again, just trying to piece everything together straight away and worrying about, oh, this doesn't sound quite right, almost saying, this is the objective of what I'm trying to say in the most functional way, and then saying, oh, okay, I know I can use that to say that, rather than trying to imagine everything up from scratch. Is kind of having that base. And my first boss ever always said, just bullet out every point, Will, because it will reduce repetition. It will make it really clear for you. And it'll just come a lot easier. And you're almost then connecting the dots with the information.
yeah, I think also just trying to use the word dump as only like an exercise is a big issue, because it's like, oh, okay, I'm glad I got that all out. Now I'm going to write something beautiful, uh, right? Without taking what you have the keys there. It just needs to be filtered, right? I always think of I think they're so funny, but is it called a word cloud or something like that, where you can like go to a website and it like makes the shape of a lizard or something,
Yeah.
something like that. Like, and then like some words will be really big, some words will be really small, some words might be repeated or something like that. I always think that's really funny, but at the same time, it like makes sense. Like it is in fact your like word map or your word cloud, because then, as you said, you can go back, pull out points or circle them maybe, because a second look at it probably highlights something that you weren't thinking about before, whether it helps you personify a service better, or like a promise or a feature or something like that. Is like, do you find that kind of like word map to the more structured kind of like column aspect, or like what do you think, maybe for you or just in general, like where you said structure comes into play, what does the structure look like? I guess, like, how practically can we help people? Like, are we talking about tables? Are we talking about hierarchy lists? Like, what do you think is like most effective for you?
I mean, for me, I probably would column things out and almost into buckets and say,
Hmm.
key messages, and
Okay.
here's four things that are really jumping out at me. These are four things we know we want to talk about. These are
Okay.
four words that are massive in our word cloud or word map or whatever it is, and is there other information that speaks to that? And so you're kind of creating buckets of language from this massive bank. I think people, again, can make things way too complicated for themselves. You see kind of word strategy houses that have 7 stories and a roof on top,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you see a human head with eyes and a brain, and it's like, this is just something layered on top of things to confuse me. And I think that is a visual shortcut to help people understand information. But I think if you can just start to bucket things,
Mm.
become a lot clearer. And for me, simpler the better. Again, everything is about trying to find the clarity. So I don't want to overcomplicate anything else with diagrams or bar charts or graphs or anything like that.
Mm.
It's trying to make things as concise and clear as possible.
Yeah. And then I think in this area, I also love the column structure, or just a list structure divided out. I love that system. I do that with my past clients, and it's amazing how much more they will think of when you show that to them, because they'll be like, oh, I forgot to add this.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
really helpful. I think, though, at this point is the struggle, especially for a designer, a creative that is going to be writing about themselves. I
Hmm.
think walking through a client this way, they have no attachment yet to what the visual is quite yet, because that's another team that's going to work on that.
Hmm.
So I'm wondering maybe if we can help creatives and designers at this point. They've done their word map, their word vomit. They've kind of categorized and like, okay, what you could call it niching down or whatever, target audience. You can talk about the values, the tone.
Yep.
Now they still just are not able to say it, like you said, in a way that sounds good to someone else and to them.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
the best way I can think about it is like when you're talking to a client or a friend or a business that maybe they do something, and then after about 5 minutes, they finally say the thing where you go, oh, you should just say that. Like it did take 5 minutes, but you should just say that. So how do we help these creatives that are so focused on design, which is a good thing,
Yeah.
formulate sentences and thoughts to like just help market themselves?
I think the number one thing for me here is always just trying to find how you speak. So we can write things down all day long, but the
Mm.
number one test for me is to read it out loud and actually start
Mm.
using your own voice. So I work with a lot of people who say, "Can you help me, write my CV or help me do my website?" And you're like, "Well, definitely, but it's going to sound more authentic if it's your words."
Mm. Hmm.
So, how can
Right.
we help designers and creatives who aren't comfortable with language speak? Because we all speak every day.
Yeah.
Like, I go to the office, I work with designers. They all speak to me in a way that only they could. They use words and a vocabulary that only they could. So it's how do we unlock that for people? So I always think when you write something down and then read it aloud, if it doesn't sound like you, or if you read it to someone and they're like, "Oh, that doesn't sound like you, John,"
Mm.
like, well, why doesn't it? So, and it's because you're almost forcing yourself to write in a way that you think people are expecting. But I think it's always way more authentic and way more impactful if you do just speak like yourself and don't try and put a persona on anything. And when it comes to marketing yourself, that's exactly what I want to see from a business or an individual, that authenticity coming through. So if I was a creative or a designer writing my own website and then I was sending that out to people, when I meet you on a Zoom call or we have a chat in person, I want you to sound like the person that sent me
Mm.
the
That's good.
website. So I think encouraging people to just relax and sound like themselves, things are going to come more naturally. And it might not sound like a polished tagline, but it will be the clearest articulation of what you're actually trying to say.
I think that's amazing advice. And I think that people are either don't like hearing their voice, and they probably just aren't doing the like reading it out loud, because that's, for me, that's where a lot of editing stuff takes place, whether it's a script, because obviously I've got over 800 something videos here on YouTube.
Yeah.
So I'm reading the script and I'm reading it back, saying certain things out loud, and I'm like, that is just too long. Like it just, at that point, I'm hoping it sounds like me because I wrote it, but at the same time, it's just like it doesn't convey what it is. Best case for what you just mentioned about not sounding like yourself. Occasionally I will try to ask ChatGPT to help me with the basically like hammering out these sections. Right? I already know the topics. I'm going to give it to it, but
Mm-hmm.
like I'm looking for references, or I'm looking for like, can you give me 5 paragraphs about this subject? And it just is like, I'm not gonna read that the way that it gave it to me. It's just, you're not gonna believe it, I don't think, as much inflection or tone or something. And so hopefully that people don't, with the power of ChatGPT, hopefully they don't just go in there and they say, make me a quick witty, you know body copy for my website to sell my design services. Like, because as you just said, when you get on that discovery call or that intro client call and you start talking to them, they're like, this is not the like ultra professional, clean cut type I saw on the on the website. Who is this Joker? So you want to try to like take it and filter it, of course. But I think that reading it out loud is such a strong indicator, or like you said, getting a friend to read it. I think that's probably even better. I
Mm,
mean, that's what you would do with the design too. That's why you have a team of designers. You
correct.
would get feedback. You would ideate on it and make it sound even better. Um, so that would be my encouragement. Of course, what you just said is reading it out loud. I'm wondering if perhaps half the struggle or the other side of the struggle is just like in sheer length. I'm wondering if there's some fears over this needs to be as short as possible, right?
Mhm.
There's this I think kind of stigma of like the elevator pitch, which I've kind of always hated that because I'm just not sure that if I have to sell it to you in like 9 seconds, I'm not sure you're my ideal client. I don't know if you are. Like, I need more time with you. I need to get to know you. But I think that's the kind of like forced idea over the years is like, I don't have time for this. Can you sell it to me in nine? This is the whole like, you know, or what's his name, Grant Cardone or whatever. All this kind of like, I don't have time for this if you can't explain the value in 10 seconds. But I don't know. What do you think about this limitation?
I don't like limitation. I know I've worked on a lot of naming brands as well, and people are like, "Can we get a 4-word name?" And it's like, well, that might not be what's best, but they're like, "But it's short, it's concise, it'll trademark and all these things." And it's like you just want it to look good, and I know that's what the actual outcome is. They want the short word because it'll design up well, and that might not be the best thing, and it might not be the best thing for you to give a short, pithy description of what you do. And I think the best example of this is in advertising. There's obviously
Mm,
short form and long form. Long
yeah.
form is an incredible format. For me, it's not about making things shorter, or a lot of people say to me, punchier. Can we make that punchier, Will? It's
Hmm.
about making sure every word is valuable. So even if you're writing 10 words or 100 words, if every word is valuable and means something, then
Mm.
people, whoever you're working with or want to work with, should value that. And if they don't, then you're probably right. They're not the right person for you. But yeah, rather than lessening your impact with less words, I would be trying to maximize your impact with the right words.
Yeah, that's good. How do you handle these kind of feedback revisions where it's like, can we make this punchier? Can we make this well, in the design thing, it's the can we make this pop? I'm assuming
Yeah,
that's the same
yeah,
thing for
exactly the same.
text, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't sound good, or it's too long, or it's like it doesn't have like electric in the in the phrase or something. I don't know. Maybe it'll be helpful for people that are like perhaps trying to self edit or feedback they get from friends or family. Is like, how do you handle these requests to make it X, to make it Y?
So I guess whenever we're doing some brand work or working on a campaign, you always have a set of values that you've established, and I think people
Mm,
can set their own values as well. So if someone says to me, "Oh, we need that to be shorter," but I'm working on a brand that values, longer form sentences, that likes to explain things, that maybe is even poetic or something in nature, that doesn't fit with their brand, that doesn't fit with their values. So then you always have something to say, well, can I have more specific feedback, or what are we really trying to say there, because that doesn't fit with what we're trying to achieve here. And
mhm,
I think it's the same for people. So every designer probably has something that they value, that they as a person value. So like you were saying, you don't want to work with someone if they want you to sum up what you do in 9 seconds, because that doesn't sit with what you value.
oh, right.
So I almost writing down like what you stand for at the start of, if you're setting up a business or you're going freelance or setting up a kind of your own thing, is always having those core values to return back to, because they're going to remove any subjectivity. They're going to give
Mhm.
you really strong foundation to build on.
Yeah, I think I'm not necessarily trying to like poo poo on the 9 second thing
Yeah,
because I think it can be done well. I just always have in my mind it's like it feels a little bit just like chasing money to agree. Maybe not if it's something that you obviously wholeheartedly believe with and you can sell your patent in 9 seconds to a big investor or something, then go for it.
yeah. If
Um,
that's you, that's great, and amazing if you can.
Yeah, exactly. Amazing if you can. That's probably not a creative or a designer. Like we're a bit more emotional than that, I'd say. Probably the idea to some of you getting on a discovery call is scary already. The
Yeah.
fact that you need to talk and interact with someone who's going to give you money to do something is already quite scary sometimes.
Mm.
I want to shift the conversation a little bit to a always hot and pressing topic, which is called SEO, or search engine optimization. And I would like to know where that comes into play when you are helping write, and or for anyone watching, if this is beneficial for you individuals writing. Of course, there's kind of like what I would call extracurricular items like blogs or landing pages where they kind of just become SEO mechanisms to get more
Mhm.
searches. But I still think that it is valuable that something like a homepage of a website or a portfolio or something you're going to post on even LinkedIn or social or wherever the touch points are, right? Where everybody's going to read your stuff
Mhm.
is important. So what do you think about that? Do you try, I guess the better question would be like, what is the process for like integrating high quality search terms that you want to be known for with body copy that reflects the values of a brand? I think it's kind of a tall order. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I think it's one of the hardest things to do in my job.
yeah, I think
It's usually the thing that upsets both the writer and the designer the most, especially
uh,
when we're designing websites and stuff, because ideally you wouldn't even be thinking about it because you're just trying to write in the voice that's right for the brand. So you're trying to write the best homepage possible without thinking I
mm,
need to land this word 3 or 4 times. But I completely
mm,
understand the business need for it. I think we mentioned ChatGPT before. I don't advise anyone to go writing everything they ever say on it, but
yeah,
finding the terms that would help surface you, it's a massively
mm,
helpful tool. So just asking ChatGPT, what terms would be useful to have on my website, what would help surface me, what would get me more attention. It's a great way of finding them. And then I would always start by writing what you want to write and then trying to weave in those terms rather than starting with those terms and saying, I need to do this. Um, I don't love trying to retrofit them in, but it's definitely an essential part of my job. But I think I think it's really obvious sometimes, and I think a friend of mine always says that you can, showing your strategy, but you can also show your SEO too clearly. And I think sometimes you can go on a website and feel like it's almost a sales pitch because the SEO
mm,
is so obvious. So just trying to weave it in naturally. So if you're a graphic designer and you want to get designing a few times, that should come quite naturally when you're talking about yourself, but not overemphasizing it, because as long as you get it in a few key places on a website, it will show up. So trying to get it in headers rather than body copy necessarily.
oh really? Okay,
So there's different tiers for it.
all
So
right,
tier one would be your headlines. Tier two is obviously your subheads, and then tier three is your body copy. Headlines are much more visible in search
mm,
engines, so always focus there, and try and that might be writing a more descriptive headline, but then bringing a bit more emotion into the body copy because that's the third kind of level down.
okay.
So yeah,
So a
um,
bit more practically sounding, perhaps, in the header, and then emphasizing it with like what it is in the body copy,
yeah,
something like that.
exactly. Yeah. Perfect way of saying it.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, there are people, designers, creatives, maybe that are also selling products,
Hmm.
whether it be some kind of a merch thing, or it might be a tool. It could be a SaaS product. It could be templates. It could be, yeah, or like I said, just like physical product. I'm wondering what you think about helping these people merge the writing and the SEO, because I have found, or I should say, I've heard the struggle in this is I don't really know how to write a meaningful product description. Uh, and certainly not one that I know how to get brought up in search results. I can give you amazing copy on my vision for why I made this brand. I can make my homepage look amazing. I can make the about page bring you to tears. but I don't really know what I'm supposed to be writing about this product, even though I believe in the product. So I don't know if you've worked with some brands and or companies, because there's a range of what a product is, I guess. But what kind of advice would you give to people who are really trying to like uh, grow that side of thing? You know?
I mean, for me, selling your products is the same as selling yourself.
Mm.
It's the same as selling your work in when you're speaking to the client. It's all kind of the same thing. So, if you can bring someone to tears on your About Us page, it'd be great if you could bring them to tears on the product page, but handling the same thing. I think the number one thing I speak to most clients about is consistency with writing. That's where it can fall down really quickly. So if
Mm.
your About Us page sounds different to your product page, you're almost speaking in two voices, whereas you need to just be consistent across one.
Mm. Okay.
So if you use the same tips, if you're finding success in explaining yourself and describing yourself and your services, you're doing exactly the same thing with your products. And that might be speaking in a more emotional way. That's fine, because it can connect with someone in that way. But if you're finding success in one aspect, I would just try and be consistent. Uh,
Mm.
but if you're finding it easier to write in a certain way, I would just try and be consistent with that as well.
Yeah, I think the hindrance maybe, or
Mhm.
the potential tactic I always kind of see is like everything else other than the product pages are pretty like influential, and then just the product descriptions. I don't know if it's because like once you're there, you're probably going to buy it, I guess, or whatever, or subscribe to it or download it, right? Whatever, because there's a range of products. And so I either see nothing or I see way too much. I'm talking about paragraphs of word vomit that I would assume is for search engine optimization. Most Etsy listings look this way, which we're not talking about that. But just when I'm perusing, I'm just like, why are there 7,000 characters in this Etsy description? Like, what on earth? So that's probably not the best tactic either, because it's like, what do I want you to do? Read this novel or buy my product? Like, we have to have some balance here. So I really love the advice of being consistent. If your aesthetic and vibe is witty, try to embed that into what the product descriptions are. If you're extremely elegant and like high class, try to use language like that. I think
Exactly.
that'll come up. So I really like that advice, and perhaps somebody's just not thought of that. They've always been stuck in this kind of like, a product is just a very bullet point oriented thing. It does this. It is this. It's this color. It's this is what it'll do for you. Buy it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
You're taking someone on a journey, though, from the minute they land on your homepage to the minute they do what you're asking them to do, which is
Hmm.
probably to put something in your basket and check out,
Yeah.
or to email you and sign up your services.
Yeah.
So you want to write until the very end, even on the call to actions to put it in your basket. There might be a specific way you say that rather than just say buy now. And a great
Mm.
example of that is someone like Rafa, the cycling brand, where even the labels inside their jackets have a little story on them, because
Oh,
that's what
really?
they're a storytelling brand. So that's what they do. So every single word can be important on a journey in convincing someone not just to do what you're asking, but to convince them about what you're like as a brand. And I think over time, if you want repeat customers, embedding that personality of the brand is just as important as having a great product. And words are a great way of achieving that.
Yeah. And I think maybe a sub question that kind of comes up from that, I love that idea of like kind of every little touch point, like you said, the tag or something like that. What other kind of like advice do you have for these other touch points that maybe come off of something like a website or a portfolio or something? So I'm thinking of like, emails. I'm thinking of like perhaps even social media, perhaps even ads. Ads maybe isn't a kind of a category in itself, because you are in fact trying to just lead someone to the hard sell. But we have like the consistency note there, which I think is just important, right? So we're already going to want the language that comes through in your newsletter or your update or your whatever social post to reflect wherever the home base is. But like obviously we have varying lengths here. A newsletter should be uh, so long, as a blog should be so long, as a social post should be so long.
Yeah.
And what kind of um, what kind of tactics or help can you give people? Are you kind of a super fan of like templates? The characters are going to be this amount, or lines are like, yeah, basically I'm just trying to help. I feel like at this part of the show, people can get overwhelmed because they really do need to do all these touch points to get people back. So how do we help them with that?
I think it's about finding what you're comfortable with. For me, certain structures do massively help. So I know when I'm writing a blog post, I try and do 3 sentences per paragraph, and then don't exceed 8 or 10 paragraphs, because that's as much information as you need, and it's just about making that digestible. There's obviously different rules for different things. I try and limit most of my headlines to 10 words, just because
they'll get long.
Older. Yeah, exactly. But in terms of, I think it all does come back to consistency. And again, it doesn't really matter if you have a longer blog post, if the rest of your writing is a bit longer form, or if you are really kind of short and bold and to the point. It doesn't matter if your blog posts are a paragraph or your social post caption is 3 words. It's kind of all about setting the character and setting the tone. And I think visually, we obviously see massive cues of that. We're not just randomly picking different colors for different touch points. We're not having different art direction for different touch points. Everything is always consistent and one tone. And I think one voice is really important. Obviously, that can flex. And I think that's another really important thing. So having some dimension to your voice. So right now, we're having a chat on a podcast that's a bit more casual. So I'll be speaking like this, but I might have an annual review in a week, and that's a much more serious meeting. So my tone would adapt to that situation. Or I might go for a walk tonight and get scared, and my tone would, again, change, because we're human. And I think it's important when you're writing for a brand or for yourself that your tone is going to change for different instances, and that's okay. So you don't always have to sound exactly the same, but you need to use the same vocabulary. You need to have the same basis, so you can tell it's coming from the same person, even if they're doing different roles with it.
Yeah, that's good. I think the last question I have for you is what I'm calling kind of like the handoff to be kind of sending off a client, perhaps like offboarding. So obviously with a person that's going to be themselves, they should always continue to like prompt themselves to do these things and write well. I'm just wondering like how you help set up a client for like future success, because they're going to need to write more things. Are there, kind of, do you help them like procure guidelines? Do you kind of like set them up with like, X, this should have X and Y, or like always come back to this set of values, or like, basically how you set up the offboarding process when it comes to writing for a client where you're probably not really going to, job's finished, it's time for them to go and live.
So offboarding, I would always try and describe what the voice is that they're trying to achieve. So that might be a person, or the voice of a, gardener, or whatever it is, or it could be a style, or it might be a phrase that you're always trying to achieve. So that kind of encapsulates what the voice is. That's what the North Star is, let's say. Then to achieve that, there would be some logic, and that might be some personality traits. That might be some guidance on different values that you're dialing up and down, and showing that flex. So I always like to think of them as rational, emotional, and aspirational values. So something you always are, something that helps you connect with people, and something that you aspire to be. And they are almost like describing your personality. And then I would give some logic on how to, like tips and techniques on how to write headlines and how to write body copy. And they're really practical. So, as we were just saying, keep sentences to this length, or use lead sentences with imperatives to encourage action, whatever it is that's right for that brand. So almost like a tick list of, yes, I've done that, I've done that, I've done that. So it kind of gets ingrained. And then I think what's always important is some examples of that coming to life, and best practice. So like we do with any guidelines, visually showing what not to do and what to do, giving some clear examples and annotating that as to why it works.
Yeah.
And that just gives them a nice bank of, okay, this is the voice I'm trying to achieve. This is how I can achieve that. And this is what that would look like in the best situation.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, this has been super helpful for me. I hope it's helpful for everyone else. I want to know, I always give the floor to our guests towards the end of our podcast to kind of talk about anything in terms of like where they can follow you, or if, I don't know if you have, resources and things that you help people with. I'm sure people are already thinking like, where can I get these guideline helps to this tick list. So yeah, if there's anywhere that you want me to direct people, of course, I'm going to link How&How down, because people can get madly influenced by that because they do such amazing work. So yeah, just anything. Where do you want to direct people to?
I mean, How&How Studio is the number one place to direct people to. That's where you're going to see a lot of what I've just spoken about coming to life. I occasionally blog as well on my LinkedIn and stuff. So
okay,
give me a follow on there for sure. But yeah, How&How is where you're going to see most of my writing and most of my advice coming out live. So give us a follow on Instagram. Give us a follow. Head to the website, look through the work. You kind of get an idea of how we approach things.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, all of that is going to be linked down in the description for you all to check out, whether you're listening on Spotify or watching on YouTube. Will, of course, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out. If anyone watching or listening has a question for either of us or just for the conversation in general, please comment down below so that we can make future videos. Perhaps Will could even write a little article on LinkedIn, which would be super helpful. And we don't know how to help unless you go down there and comment. So that would be super helpful. Also, if you have your own tips and tricks, feel free to share those in the comments. I'm sure we'd be happy to check that out, how you kind of discipline yourself in writing. We'd love to know that. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel so you don't miss videos like this one. And we will see you in the next one. Bye.
Thank you.